Mr. Prime Minister, we have about 5,000 young people a week that are dying in that ridiculous war.
Putin's much more in control of the situation because he's just sitting back behind his big oak desk in Moscow with a very large glass of best Russian vodka over ice and a big white cat sitting on his knee as he's stroking it, because Donald Trump's doing everything that Putin wants him to do.
This is Putin's peace plan. The plan that's been proposed to Ukraine is a plan in which basically Putin gets everything that he's already gotten.
To try and shape the world order along the line of great powers doing what they want and little powers like Ukraine just having to accept it and knuckle under.
Putin wants to remain in control. That's why he's dragging it out. That's why he's saying things he knows Trump wants to hear. That's why he's playing Witkoff. And Steve Witkoff has been to see Putin 3 times. He hasn't been to see Zelensky once.
In the past, the United States used to be the most stalwart when it came to standing up against dictatorship and oppression. And now the United States is siding with the dictators over the democracy.
America is going to likely be increasingly isolated.
Trump has completely upended the world order.
Putin thinks in generations. Trump is thinking in his first 100 days.
We're putting a lot of pressure on Russia, and Russia knows that, and some people that are close to it know, or he wouldn't be talking right now. But I think they both want to make peace. I do believe so. There's a lot of hatred there. There's a lot of very bad blood, a lot of distrust. But I think I hope we're going to get there for the sake of a lot of young people that are dying.
Trump promising to end the war within 24 hours of getting in office was a Trump arrogance aimed at his domestic political audience as part of his electoral campaign. Once he got into office, he realised that was impossible, and it's been extended to 100 days. That's why we're seeing all of the pressure going on at the moment to try and get this done, because I think we're on day 90-ish. So that's putting the impetus behind things. But I think he's beginning to realise he's bitten off more than he can chew. It's a much more complex issue than he'd first considered. And he recognises that Putin is holding a lot of the power play cards. And Putin's a past master at playing things. He's playing a very politically naive Steve Witkoff, his Trump special envoy. He's playing Donald Trump and saying things that Trump wants to hear. And there seems to be some form of historical issue between Trump and Zelensky, which is why I think Trump and his team are rounding on Zelensky.
I don't hold Zelensky responsible, but I'm not exactly thrilled with the fact that that war started. That was a war that would have never started if I were president. You'd have millions of people living right now that are dead. You'd have cities that would be open and thriving, and they'd have their beautiful turrets. Those turrets are the most beautiful in the world, but they're not with us any longer. They're smashed to smithereens, laying on the ground in a million pieces, getting hit by rockets, bombs, and bullets.
Well, it's not clear exactly what the relationship is between Putin and Trump. Obviously, Trump seems to have some kind of sympathy and affinity for Putin based on the way he doesn't force Putin to make any concessions and the way that he publicly humiliates Zelensky, both at the White House and in various other interactions. But at the end of the day, Trump doesn't determine the outcome of this war. There are 2 parties that determine the outcome of the war. One is Ukraine and the other is Russia. The Ukrainians understand that when Russia occupies their territory, the women get, the men get tortured and often killed, and the children get kidnapped. And we saw exactly that scenario play out in Bucha when the Russians occupied Bucha outside of Kiev, in Irpin, and various other places. And so the Ukrainians are not going to give up under any circumstances. And therefore, this war is not going to end on the basis of Donald Trump announcing 24 hours, 100 days, or anything. And at the end of the day, the war will either be won or lost by either Ukraine eventually creating a military advantage for themselves, so Putin is forced to negotiate, or vice versa, if Russia creates that own military advantage and Ukraine has no more choice. But at the moment, neither side has a decisive military advantage. And as a result, it's hard to imagine a scenario where the war ends on any of these current proposed terms that are being floated out there.
The Prime Minister understands that better than anybody. He wouldn't be talking right now. He's talking, and we're putting a lot of pressure. I think he wants to make a deal. We're going to find out very soon, but it takes two to tango. And you have to have Ukraine want to make a deal too. And they're being hit very hard. And I do believe they want to make a deal.
He's changed the world order. I mean, the transatlantic security architecture is rapidly, I would say, being depleted. I think the Americans are quite clear they're not going to be the ones that support Europe anymore. Or they're not going to be the main supporter of Europe. Europe has to do far more than it's already doing. They talk about 5% of GDP being spent on military, which itself is interesting because America doesn't spend 5% of its GDP on its military. It spends 3.5%. So telling the Europeans they have to spend 5%, America possibly could do the right thing and also spend 5% of its GDP on its military and therefore lead by showing. It will certainly be a problem. Trump doesn't do alliances. He's very bilateral in terms of relationships. Europe is going to have to do far more, but not just Europe. In terms of the alliances that America has created in Asia, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, plausibly Indonesia and Vietnam as well. These countries have not spent much on their military, Japan and South Korea and the Philippines especially, and Trump does not take kindly to countries that want to be supported by America but do not do their own support themselves. Taiwan is another example. So therefore it will create fragility in the international order. We will see more mid-term powers like Turkey and the United Arab Emirates and plausibly Russia elsewhere start to take a more proactive stance in terms of geopolitics. So we can expect to see the international order fragmenting. America is going to likely be increasingly isolated. China will also try and forge new alliances, but there is very little trust for the Chinese government in Asia. So that will also lead possibly to arms races. It will potentially lead to huge instability across the world. And we will just have to wait and see in terms of this.
I have my own deadline. And we want it to be fast. And the Prime Minister is helping us. He wants it to be fast too. And I think everybody in this, at this time in NATO, they want to see this thing happen. So we have a deadline, and after that we're going to have a very much different attitude. But I think it has a very good chance of getting done.
The proposed peace plan is giving Putin physical ownership of Crimea, is what they're proposing. It's giving Putin not just the areas of the Donbass region that Putin has militarily captured, but potentially all of them. And Putin's just quite happy with that, and he'd be happy for the front lines to be stabilized there, whether it be a full-time, a formal peace agreement that comes out or just a ceasefire. I don't think Putin really cares, because it would give him a chance to rebuild his forces up again, and at some stage at a later date take another salami slice off Ukraine and take another salami slice. Putin thinks in generations. Trump is thinking in his first 100 days.
They've been fighting. They've lost a lot of territory. We'll do the best we can, working with Ukraine. We'll do the best we can, but they lost a lot of territory. When you say Crimea, that was handed over during a president named Barack Hussein Obama. That had nothing to do with me, Crimea. That was 11 years ago with Obama.
There is no chance that Putin is going to stop what he's doing because he now has a big advantage. So he was ready to sacrifice an enormous amount. And when I say sacrifice, I mean close to 1 million soldiers have either been killed or maimed and permanently disabled. That is a huge sacrifice. On top of that, the Russian economy is in a complete mess. And Putin did this with the intention of achieving his maximalist goals of taking over Ukraine. And if anything now, he sees himself having an advantage, and he sees the advantage being that Donald Trump is on his side. And therefore, he has no reason whatsoever to in any way back down. He wants to finish what he started. And we saw that during the last month when Ukraine was ready to implement a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, and Russia wasn't. And I believe that Putin will continue on with this war until he is physically stopped. And that requires the continued support of the United Kingdom, the European Union, and other allies providing military aid and providing financial aid.
I see this as Putin doing what Putin does. He will propose a peace deal. We look at the Easter ceasefire that he proposed, a 30-hour ceasefire. Very quickly, President Zelensky of Ukraine came out and said, let's turn this into a 30-day ceasefire. And Putin's response was to continue with the rocket attacks and against Ukrainian infrastructure and continue the attacks on the front line. So there was no ceasefire that's there. Why Donald Trump isn't seeing that, because his intelligence services will be seeing that and briefing him on that, I don't know. It's very difficult to get inside the mind of someone who is being so random in his thinking. Putin will say anything that he thinks will play to Donald Trump, will play to Putin's supporters, and will play to his domestic audience as well. And in the Putin supporters, I include Iran, North Korea, but more particularly China in that. And the Russians have got a doctrine of masking the reality. It's called maskirovka. It's all about giving partial truths out, but spinning it in a way that's preferential for what you're doing. And then they've got another doctrine, which is Varanya, which is literally translates as lying. They will say something just to get it out there, knowing that the full world doesn't believe that it's true, but they don't care because nobody's going to call them out.
Well, we don't know exactly what the relationship is between Putin and Trump. What we do know is that Trump's actions and his opinion about Putin are at odds with the American public. The American people think that Putin is a bad guy. 90% of Americans think that he's a villain. A vast majority of Americans support Ukraine and support giving more military aid to Ukraine. And so the fact that Trump is taking this view, which is out of sync with the American people, suggests there's something else going on, and that something else nobody knows. But what I can tell you is that Trump is not behaving irrationally, even if it looks that way. Trump is doing it for some personal interest, and we don't know what his personal interests are, but they're certainly not in the national interests of the United States. This is Putin's peace plan. The plan that's been proposed to Ukraine is a plan in which basically Putin gets everything that he's already gotten, that Ukraine can't join NATO, that Crimea is permanently lost and recognized by the West, and various other things. And of course, sanctions being lifted so Putin can now rearm and then have another go. And by the way, there have been peace treaties or ceasefires in the past. There were two agreements. One was called the Minsk I agreement, and the other was called the Minsk II agreement, in which Russia was supposed to stop fighting. They signed these agreements, and then they kept on fighting. Everybody understands that Russia will continue no matter what. And the only thing that could possibly happen in this proposed deal that Trump has come up with is that Putin stops temporarily. He uses all the time that he has to rearm, and then he has another go. And at some point, he's going to have a go not just at Ukraine, but at the Baltic states or Poland, in which case it drags Europe into a war with Russia. And of course, we want to do everything we can to avoid that, which is why continuing to support Ukraine is